Hello and welcome to a Taylor's Tales podcast. This is Chris's Corner. I'm your host Chris Taylor and welcome back to a brand new episode. This week I'm going to be talking about Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
And how the greatest Star Wars story of all time can save Disney. And I really do mean it. I genuinely, after re-listening to the audiobook for Darth Plagueis by James Luceno, I've also read the book multiple times, reread it, first read it back in 2016, I know, crazy, 8 years ago, and it has stuck with me all these years. The book itself that's on my shelf has aged, unlike Darth Plagueis, and I want to go over why this story needs to be made more than any of the other crap that Disney's put out there. Not only could it revitalize Disney, it could save the franchise of Star Wars, because this is the story that everybody wants to hear. The mystery behind Episode 3, the very thing that turned Anakin to the dark side, the speech conducted within the Senate of Coruscant. You know, the whole what actually was going on behind the Phantom Menace, how every point of the prequels came together through Plagueis basically being the puppet master of the whole arc of the prequels. Now, we all assume that Sidious is the main villain in Phantom Menace, and we all think that Sidious is the Phantom Menace, but the true Phantom Menace is actually Plagueis. Now, granted, we're going to have, there's people out there who are going to say that George Lucas doesn't verify blah, 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 blah. Fuck it. I think if a good story makes sense and a character is so well written and loved by the fan base, which Darth Plagueis is, as well as the backstory behind Sidious as well, that brings it all together, makes the character well-rounded, makes you want to know more and crave the inner workings of the dark side of the Force.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
If you want more, let's be honest, we love the Jedi, we love Anakin, we love Obi-Wan, we love Qui-Gon, we love Yoda, we love that whole thing, but there's a true urge and want to know about the Sith. There's such a mystery behind it. And when you go further and you find more information about the greatest Sith Lords of all time, such as Darth Vitiate, for instance, who was an emperor for 1,000 years of the Sith Empire, this is just such a cool, he was so powerful that he took one of the greatest Jedis of all time in Revan and turned him to the dark side and his apprentice at the same time, and then sent him back to the Jedi and take over the Republic just by turning these two Jedi to the dark side. That's how powerful the Sith can be. And this is something that I love about the story of Darth Plagueis, is that he basically manipulates the whole of the Republic and the galaxy through playing a really long game of chess, moving pieces across. First of all, as well, the story itself has this amazing full circle feeling to it. You start off with Sidious having killed Plagueis. There's no spoiler. That's in the first page of the book. You find this out. So Plagueis has been killed by Sidious. First page. You jump in. That's what you see. You're like, whoa, okay, cool. We already know what's going to happen. But this is what's really interesting, because we already know Plagueis is dead because of Episode 3. There's no way that the Master's going to be alive because Sidious is there. Now, the question that always lurks in my mind by the end of this book is he still alive in some fashion? Now, granted, everyone out there is going to say no, but I just love that edge, that cliffhanger of, did he learn in time the level of immortality, or was his hubris so big and his blind spot for Sidious so large that he'd allowed it to basically no longer see the ability to need his powers to fight back? And I love this because it's almost the reference to the beginning of the book, where at the beginning of Darth Plagueis, you see him kill his own master, Darth Tenebrous, by this blind spot, not seeing that Plagueis was going to kill him.
You? Yes, Master. Your death comes at my bidding. You said yourself that perpetuation with purpose is the way to victory, and so it is. Go to your grave knowing that you are last of the old order, the vaunted rule of two, and that the new order begins now, and will for 1,000 years remain in my control.
This is why it needs to be made into a movie. These brilliant characters, like Darth Tenebrous as well. Plagueis' master is a fascinating character. A Biff who decided to invest his time into the inner workings of science, of Sith science, and to the mechanics of being able to clone and manipulate beings into a Sith empire, basically. So his whole idea was that in order to rebuild the Sith, he was going to utilize the cloning system and put dark energy, dark power into them, and see if he was able to build his own army. And Plagueis, throughout the beginnings of the books, laughs at it, scoffs at it, basically says he's like, it's a fucking shit plan, dude. And they'd it's made clear at the beginning of the book as well that they diverged in separate areas to what they thought the Sith should have become, or would become. And it's funny, isn't it? Because Sidious takes the plan that Plagueis puts together in the book. So Plagueis has this idea of how he was going to place somebody as basically the puppet for ruling the entire galaxy, and that he would manipulate this ruler from the back end of the dark side so that he could learn powers of the dark side to become immortal and Playface. And it's funny because at the beginning of the book as well, you see Darth Plagueis and his real name, or maybe less of his real name, Plagueis being his real name, his true name, and then his name that he used in public, Higo Damask, or Magister Damask as he's known by the the Muns and the other banking clan. It's fascinating that he's born into this wealth of money, and that the Sith almost are in some reference to the powerful 1% of society, and that they're weaving in the background this fascinating unknown group of people who have the ability to manipulate the worst parts of society to be able to get what they want. And this is what you see at the beginning of the book, is that Plagueis is immediately able to get whatever he wants, whenever he wants, by using whatever means necessary. And I think what's really cool at the beginning of the book, and all the way to the middle of the book as well, is we see Plagueis is willing to kill at any point. He is a machine. So one of the first scenes is he's getting off world after having killed his master, and he's trying to get off world without being spotted or use any public transport. And he tries to coerce this ship into being able to allow him on board to be able to go to his home world. And this is where we discover that he's just got this killer instinct where if he doesn't get his way, that's it. He murders the entire crew. And that's what he does. And this is something that people would love to fucking see on the big screen. Can you imagine? He's just killed his master. He's trying to get off world, and then he's like, it's like an Alien scene where he doesn't get what he wants, and bam, he cuts off heads. He slices off face, like he gets the lightsaber out. It's blood, it's guts, it's everything. It's the one thing we've never seen as a Star Wars world. A fear, a bad guy we're terrified of. That's what we need to make the Sith in this book. And I said it, if Disney ever listened to this, I'll friggin' direct it. I know exactly who to put in these films. Like, we just have to take an AI version of as McDermott, and we'll make him a younger version of him so that he can play Sidious still, and then we use the older version to be able to play the older version later on in this series as well. I think what's really cool is that a lot of the end of the book overlaps with the movie of The Phantom Menace, so you can have these little clicks of characters we already know. We just snap our fingers and we go boom. Oh yes, we know Qui-Gon Jinn. We know Count Dooku. We know Sifo-Dyas. How did he get in there? Like, it's just bam, 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 flush out the story. But none of that is present at the beginning, and I think this is why I love the first half of the book more than the second half, because it's so focused on Plagueis himself. And I think that's done deliberately by James Luceno. This idea of, we see him progress into a true Sith Master, a true Sith Lord, and we see him basically use his strength and his mind and his knowledge and his ability to be able to read others and to be able to position people into areas of the galaxy to be able to do what he wishes and get what he wants, by basically creating the Trade Federation, which would, create trading routes between the smaller outer rim planets. And then he would basically utilize that as a way to be able to use those seats in the Senate to be able to get what he wants. And he would do that by funding those trade federations and his intergalactic banking clan would be able to fund the back door to the Senate, which would make it more corrupt and it would make it easier to manipulate later down the line. And it's not until we're way into the book that we actually get to meet Sidious, which is great, and I think it's perfect. I think the build up to the sort of character of Plagueis, his immediate want to learn how to manipulate the midichlorian to be able to create everlasting life is there from the beginning, where he basically kills the apprentice that his master had taken in secret to be able to send to kill him as an assassin, and fails miserably because he underestimates Plagueis. And it's again a little bit of foreshadowing. Darth Tenebrous underestimated Plagueis. Plagueis underestimated Sidious. And it's this great kind of beautiful foreshadowing that's used throughout the book, and almost hints at what's going to happen later on in the book. And again, it kind of actually highlights a little bit of what Lucas could have done, in that Sidious didn't see Vader as ever a threat to him in the original Star Wars. It's always, master and apprentice, like the Bane line still. I kind of feel like there's almost a relationship of Sidious sees his apprentices as the way he treats Maul, up until we hear at the end of the book where he sees Anakin as his apprentice, his true apprentice, but I don't think he sees Vader as his actual apprentice. I think when Anakin becomes Darth Vader and he loses his limbs and he loses to Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think it's almost like Vader becomes like Maul, disposable, an assassin, a pawn to be used rather than a true Sith Lord. Now, many people are going to disagree with me because Darth Vader has such a monolith of, gargantuan amounts of power, of dark side power, and that's understandable. But there's almost like Sidious has this characteristic within him that you can read within this book, where you understand his underlying distaste for certain people, and that if they don't show true, his level of power, then he doesn't truly respect them. And it's the same, funny enough, with Count Dooku. Count Dooku, he understands that he's a great lightsaber wielder, but he's also easy to manipulate. And he's also wouldn't ever settle for being an apprentice, and he understands that, and he would never settle for being just a part player, and he would always want to be a true Sith Lord. But this is the problem that we see in this story, is that there's also Maul, who starts to want to become a Sith Lord as he sees it, but he's not ever given the true story behind what's going on in the background, because of Plagueis and Sidious are playing this part. And you can see this is almost like a Game of Thrones story, in the sense of how much is going on in terms of political manipulation and twists and turns in the story. Can you imagine? Now, even if this was turned into a TV series, which probably it could be because there's so much depth to it and there's so many stories that could be made, but really what we need is a 2 to 3 hour long movie, and that one that really goes into depth. Now, my only thought is that there could be a problem with people getting a little bit tired of the political side of things, because there is a lot of political commentary throughout this story that could bore people, but there's also a lot of just pure Sith destructive battles, tearing throats out, people being torn apart, heads flying off, assassinations, battle droids being blown away. And there's a real interesting foundation of how a Sith Lord and Master handles a Sith apprentice. And this is truly seen in how Plagueis emboldens, Sidious into becoming a Sith Lord. And I think almost what's funny is they call him Darth Plagueis the Wise, and Sidious does it not out of a compliment, but out of actual disrespect, because he was wise enough to be able to develop his ability to be able to save others from death, but he wasn't wise enough to see his own death coming. And it was really interesting when you get to the end of the book, you get this revelation that Sidious was moving the pieces himself. But actually, I think that's a level of... what's the word? Arrogance? Yeah, I think arrogance. I don't think he actually believes that. I think he says that because he's saying it out of anger and hatred for his master. But the truth is that he'd become a messenger at some point, and that a lot of the moves that were made in the second half of the book, where there was the killing of the Black Sun, there was the killing of certain people in the Hutt group, there was the killing of the previous throne king of Naboo as well. These pieces as well, everybody thought, Plagueis put them together. But the turning point in the book that I think would be genuinely fascinating to see in a film is where Plagueis gets outmaneuvered by a threat from outside that he didn't see coming. And it's from the Grands, and they're a separate group who have interests in the Senate, one of which being a senator, and they send assassins to kill him, and he doesn't see it coming. And one of his closest allies, Lars Hill, gets killed in the process. And he was one of the Muns in the banking clan. And this whole occurrence is where they're basically being very prideful Muns and incorporating one of their own into this secret group of Muns. And it's in this meeting that assassins are found and they kill everybody. And, Plagueis gets mortally wounded, basically, and would have died if it hadn't been for Sidious coming there to save him. And it's in that moment that the story turns on its head. Up until this point, we see basically 90% of the story from Plagueis' perspective, and then all of a sudden it starts to fade slowly towards Sidious, and everything's swinging, and James Luceno's done this really nice pull on the story where we start to realize, Plagueis has basically written himself out of his own story, and he's not realized it, and that Sidious has gave himself so much power. And as the Sith teachings show, the more power, the more you crave, and the more realization you don't need your own master. And so he realizes that he no longer needs Darth Plagueis anymore. And this, to me, is just a brilliant idea. You start with Plagueis doing the very thing that Sidious does to his master, and it brings the rule of two back in again, and that Bane was right from the beginning. There can only ever be a master to have all of the knowledge, and an apprentice to always crave said knowledge and crave said power. It's genius. It really is. And it's so well written in the sense that the characters who oppose Plagueis and Sidious throughout the story as well are genuinely interesting. Their interests as well actually sometimes are really good. So for instance, there's characters from Alderaan who you know would actually become a really good Chancellor. And the fact that Palpatine gets elected as Chancellor is purely because of the Sith. And this is so cool. Because you look at the Jedi, they're peacekeepers. They're warriors to some extent, but they are peacekeepers mainly. And that they don't really have this political... You know, you hear it from Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm not brave enough for politics.
Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics.
You know, this is the thing. The Jedi are almost blinded to this, but the Sith, they take it in. They're not afraid of being able to take the power of the galaxy. And we see this with Plagueis basically using planets as playgrounds to some extent. Like he'll have an entire world where there's like an old isolated species that is evolving out of Sith sort of visits. Like the Sith ship will come every 10 years, every decade, or every 100 years with a brand new master and apprentice, and the civilization will have evolved, and it's all they do is they go there, and the people of that world are there to attack the Sith, and the Sith are there to kill as many of the warriors as they can, basically. And it's just, I think that there's so much depth in that story, in the Sith, in the dark side of the Force, which we never really get to see. There's also the backstory of one of the coolest characters of all time in Star Wars, Darth Maul. Now, we've seen how his story has evolved in Clone Wars, and everybody loved it, and they called Dave Filoni a fucking genius for it. But the truth is that if we were to look into this story, and we gave Dave Filoni this story now, would he do it? I hope so. I think they're fucking fools if they're not gonna. It is crazy. They have one of the greatest stories written for Star Wars. It is there. It's 100,000% better than any of the new Star Wars shit, and that is including Rogue One. And I'm sorry, I love that film, but it's nothing compared to Plagueis, because we are going to see characters we know. We're going to see how Count Dooku is turned to the dark side. You're going to see how Maul grows up. You are seeing everything from the perspective of the Sith. You're going to see Sith sorcery. You're going to understand how Sidious became so evil, and the fact that Plagueis manipulated him into the killing of his own family. Boom. Mic drop. Fucking... Dude, he literally whispers in his ear, "You need to emancipate yourself, Plagueis." And it's like the same manipulation that Sidious, he says to him. Plagueis says to him, "You need to emancipate yourself," and he says that to Sidious. And then Sidious uses the exact same tactic in Episode 3 on Anakin. And it's written like that deliberately to show the reflection of how the Sith can use their manipulation skills to be able to create dark side energy in beings. And Sidious is brilliant at it because he does it first to Dooku, and then Plagueis does it to Sifo-Dyas, which is so interesting. And Sifo-Dyas creating the clone army is done because Plagueis manipulates him into doing it. Count Dooku doesn't join the Separatists without Sidious manipulating him to do so. Sidious doesn't become Chancellor without Plagueis having played his part in using the banking clan to be able to manipulate the other senators into voting for him. These pieces are all there, all interconnected, all originating from the first start of Tenebrous being killed by Plagueis. And what's even cooler is that Darth Tenebrous's master, Plagueis' master's master, was the one who created the rift in the Force that made the Jedi realise the Sith was still alive. And this is before even Maul gets back on Naboo and kills Qui-Gon and is killed by Obi-Wan. And this is the interesting part, is that we've developed the Clone Wars so much, but we have never delved into the Sith part. And I believe there's the occult coming up on Star Wars. I'm not interested. Like, That's if it touches on the Sith Empire, I'm interested. I'm in. But you have missed out on two of the best stories ever told, Revan and now Darth Plagueis. And if you do not invest in those, Disney, there is no hope for you. You will die a cold and lonely death because you have realized you have gone down this woke path, and you have gone down the path where nobody's going to watch your movies because you will not invest in good, well-developed story. And this is a good, well-developed story that could make you so much money. I promise you now that you're thinking about wider audiences, but there's a big enough audience in Star Wars to create Darth Plagueis, and you need to make this R-rated. Because this needs to be told right. It needs to be blood. It needs to be guts. It needs to be terrifying force lightning that frizzes and bloody kills everybody. And torture of closing the friggin' windpipe so tightly that it bulges out people's eyes. Like, that's the level we're talking about here. It's got to be that. It's got to be so dark. And it's got to be this level of lust for power. And this, there's this amazing scene where Sidious is sent on a task to execute a whole, to basically go kill the people who tried to attempt to kill Plagueis. And there's a description in there where Sidious catches himself in the mirror, and he sees his bright yellow eyes, blood on his face, his hair all over the place. Like shockwaves of static energy have been placed on it by the electricity of the Force, and it's this, they describe like saliva around his mouth as well. This animalistic attack force, and this is what the dark side is all about: an animalistic, lust, driven, just everything, death, power. Everything we need to see. We've seen the light side. We've seen the battle. We need to see something that isn't, look at how much the fan base loves Order 66. The dark side. Look how much everyone loves Episode 3 now because of seeing the manipulation of Sunday being turned to the dark side. This is far greater than that. This is a story not only of Sidious rising, but also of understanding his master and understanding the story of Episode 3 and how everything up in Episode 1 of The Phantom Menace is a manipulation of Plagueis, and how this is all built up by people being placed around. For instance, Jabba the Hutt being placed on Tatooine. That was because of Plagueis. A favour for a favour being placed there. Again, all of these people, the fact that Padme Amidala is elected as Queen of Naboo because of Plagueis and Palpatine. This is what we need to hear. These pieces of information, I'm giving you a mere surface level taster of the story. Now, if you haven't read the book, go read the book. If you can't be bothered to read, go listen to the audiobook. It's on Spotify Premium. It's there for you, ready and rocking and rolling. It's 30 chapters. It's just, you'll blitz through it, I promise. And if you've got a Kindle as well, you'll be flicking through it like nobody's business. The level of detail as well, when we're talking about understanding how Plagueis understands how to resurrect people from death, and go into understanding the Force can be used as a way to be able to bypass death. It's fascinating. His Force experimentation on a couple of worlds like Sojourn as well, and how he disappears into his studies for basically 20 years and is quote-unquote retired from the banking clan. This is the point in the story where Plagueis makes a mistake. He has his attempted assassination, and then he goes into trying to understand how he can become immortal. And by doing so, he removes himself as the master, and he becomes a retiree, basically. And Sidious takes his place. Also, by Plagueis allowing Sidious to take the apprentice of Maul is a mistake as well, because it therefore supersedes him, and it also removes him from the line of Bane. And when we see, all of the scenes with Maul and Sidious, one of them being in Coruscant, where they're on the balcony talking to each other about the plan for Naboo, Plagueis is watching that conversation. He's listening into that conversation from his apartment across the way, and he can hear every word the two Sith are saying. Now, what's really funny is that Maul never meets Plagueis in his entire life, but he's aware that Sidious has his own master. So it's really this really interesting line of master-apprentice throughout that. And the fact that Plagueis doesn't spot Sidious becoming more power-hungry, more in need of being the master and no longer the apprentice. It's kind of, why the whole thing of him being called Darth Plagueis the Wise is brilliant. And it makes so much sense. He allowed himself to get comfortable. And this is probably almost like when you get so powerful that you become complacent. It's a great story for that, to understand that at the beginning of the story, Plagueis is in the peak of his powers. He is just unstoppable. And you see this throughout the story, and there is a turning point which just completely turns it on his head, and he slowly decays, and then he gets to the point where he's weak enough for Sidious to take him on. And that's where the story of Palpatine becoming Chancellor and the Clone Wars beginning. It's brilliant. And what's even better is that you get the epilogue and you get a conversation between Count Dooku and him, and then Sidious basically choosing Anakin as his next apprentice. Now, I have just given you a 30-minute podcast on why Darth Plagueis needs to be made as a film, and that if Disney choose to do so, they'll make millions, they will revive the fan base, they will make a lot of money, and they will also get a lot of credit for doing so. And I doubt anyone will hear this, I doubt anyone will truly listen to this, but I have to make the statement. I see this as the turning point of no return for Disney. If they have the IP of Star Wars for any longer, and they continue to throw it down the toilet, this will be the story that needs to be made. And this is the podcast that will be said to say that not only does it need to be made, these are all the reasons why. These are the developed characters. These are the developed storyline. These are the worlds that you could use. And there is such depth that you could make it a movie or a TV show. Personally, I think it's a movie, and I think it's a film that would be an absolute showstopper, would be the best of all Star Wars stories, one that would be as beloved as Episode 3. So, leaving it on that, this has been a Taylor's Tales podcast. This has been Chris's Corner. I've been your host, Chris Taylor, and as always, I shall see you in the next podcast. Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?